Bill, the Boy Wonder, the secret co-creator of Batman, by Marc Tyler Nobleman, illustrated by Templeton. After Milton Finger graduated from high school, he invented his first secret identity. In 1933, Jews were sometimes not hired just because they were Jews. Milton was commonly a Jewish name, so Milton chose a new one, Bill. During the Great Depression, Bill's father was forced to close his Bronx tailor shop. The family was struggling, so Bill took any job he could get, one after the other, and disliked them all. Bill's parents had pressured him to become a doctor. Bill wanted to be an artist and a writer. In early 1939, he was a shoe salesman. Bill loved literature, and he had ideas. He shared some of them with Bob Kane, a cartoonist he'd met at a party. Bob was so wowed that he asked Bill to write adventure stories for him to illustrate. They collaborated on a couple of comic book features that did get published but didn't get much attention. Superman had debuted the year before and was a smash from the start. One Friday, Vin Sullivan, an editor at the company that would become DC Comics, told Bob that he wanted another superhero sensation. Bob said he'd have one by Monday. That weekend, he sketched, but felt that the character wasn't coming together. He needed help. As for who was the man for the job, he put his finger on it right away. Bob hightailed it to Bill's Bronx apartment. He showed Bill what he'd drawn. Underneath, he had scrawled a potential name, the Batman. Wings aside, Bob's design reminded Bill too much of Superman. Bill figured a character named after a bat should look menacing, even though he would be a good guy. The red Union suit struck Bill as too cheery. He proposed colors that would better fade into the shadows. He recommended replacing the wisp of a mask with a cowl that covered all but Batman's chin. Pointing out an illustration of a bat in a dictionary, he said, "Why don't we duplicate the ears?" He felt that the wings were awkward. "I suggest you make a cape and scallop the edges," Bill said. "It would flow out behind him when he runs and look like bat wings." He thought Batman would be more intimidating if it seemed that he had no pupils, just white slits for eyes. Bill knew that Batman should not only look different from Superman, but also be different. Superman was alien-born and near invulnerable. Bill thought that Batman should be a human being who could be hurt. A superhero without superpowers. Someone anyone can be. Bob liked Bill's changes. Come Monday, Bob indeed had a superhero for Vin, though the superhero's name was about all that remained of Bob's concept. Bob showed Batman to Vin, without Bill. Vin promptly wanted to run Batman, and Bob negotiated a deal without including Bill. Batman had Bill's fingerprints all over him, yet Vin did not know there was a Bill. Bob told Bill that Batman would be published and asked Bill to write it, without credit. Because such an arrangement was fairly typical, and because writing gigs were tough to get, but mainly because Bill was an agreeable sort, he said yes. With that, Bill took on his second secret identity. However, he would soon realize that he had been blind about this bat. In April 1939, Batman flitted into newsstands as a lead feature in Detective Comics number 27. Bill's writing style was influenced by trashy pulp magazines and classy novels comic strips, and cinema. He fused it all into a type of character that readers had not seen before. A hero who looked like a villain, a vigilante, who was also a detective. Bill and Bob would sit in Poe Park, named for Edgar Allan Poe, father of the modern detective story, close to the cottage where Poe had lived nearly a century before. The duo would brainstorm detective stories of their own. Though Bill had wanted Batman to differ from Superman, Batman instantly copied Superman in a most welcome way. The Dark Knight was a white-hot hit. At age 25, Bill no longer had to be a shoe salesman or anything anyone else wanted him to be. Batman became Batman, and Bill became a full-time, if modestly paid and anonymous, writer. Almost immediately, Bob hired other artists to do the drawing and insisted they too work anonymously. Among the first was a gifted 17-year-old named Jerry Robinson. Between deadlines, Bill and Jerry saw foreign films and played darts. Jerry knew Bill was increasingly troubled that Bob claimed all the credit for Batman. But Bill stuck with it. Now that Batman had caught on, he needed to come up with an origin for him. He asked himself what could drive a man to dress as a giant winged mammal and protect strangers from evil every night. He arrived at a horrific answer. A young boy stands by helplessly as a mugger shoots his parents to death and gets away. The boy vows to prevent other people from suffering as he has. For years he trains his mind and body until both are in peak condition. As an adult, he dons a grim costume and patrols the streets to strike terror into the superstitious, cowardly hearts of criminals. Before Bill, comic book characters saved lives simply because they were born heroes. Bill was the first writer to saddle a superhero with an emotional reason to wage war on crime. Through grief and rage, Batman was made a hero. Steadily, silently, Bill built a vivid world around Batman. Knowing from secret identities he'd given Batman one, wealthy heir Bruce Wayne. Bill dubbed Batman City Gotham after seeing the word in the phone book. He called Batman's car the Batmobile and his underground base the Batcave. Bill was an idea factory. Bob called him a boy wonder. Batman doesn't have anyone to talk to, Bill said. So another boy wonder was born, a partner in crime busting and fellow orphan named Robin. Young readers who had imagined they could be Batman when they grew up now imagined they could be Robin tomorrow. Sales doubled. Heroes and other comics recruited their own kid sidekicks. In 1940, Batman got his own comic. In the first issue, he confronted a killer clown named the Joker and a beguiling burglar who became known as Catwoman. Bill concocted memorable rogues almost as regularly as some people compiled grocery lists. Other comic creators were so impressed with Bill's talent that they couldn't keep his secret. They told editors that he, not Bob, was writing Batman. Thrilled, editors began giving Bill assignments directly. Both Bill and Bob kept working on Batman. The difference was that Bill no longer worked for Bob. Bill liked to ride through the city to think. As the bus picked up passengers, Bill picked up plots from street scenes and daydreams. He recorded stray facts, the boiling point of mercury, the Chinese character for virtue, what happens when a dog's nose gets cold, and what he called his gimmick book. He routinely skimmed it for a spark that might ignite a story. In time, he had a library of gimmick books at his fingertips. He even let other writers, his competitors, hunt for story ideas in them. In 1948, Bill and his wife, Portia, had their only child. They named him Fred. Bill called him Littlefinger. Bill took Fred on weekend expeditions to the zoo or the planetarium. When Fred was still below the minimum age allowed to enter the American Museum of Natural History, Bill snuck him in. While his son was getting an education around town, Bill was collecting more gems for the gimmick book. In every person, there is something that says, "I'd like to return to the innocence of my childhood," Bill said. To capture that, he sometimes asked Fred for his opinion on scripts. Bill was fond of writing offbeat action sequences involving oversized props. Batman would clash with a crook while clinging to a colossal clock, or tussle with a thug atop a Titanic typewriter. Once he launched himself after a foe from a huge toaster. Bill ripped images from National Geographic or Popular Science and clipped them to his scripts as references for the artists. They loved when Bill was at bat. To get his stories just right, Bill worked long days and sometimes, like Batman, all night. Not like Batman, he fueled up on chicken soup to get through the wee hours. But Bill's gimmick gathering and art accumulating research methods often took more time than he was supposed to use. If Bill told someone he had a script due on Monday, it probably meant last Monday. Some editors put up with Bill's lateness because his stories turned out so crackerjack. Others could be cruel, yelling at Bill in front of his peers. During the first 25 years of Batman comics, Bill's name appeared in one only once, sort of. A 1943 story depicted a poster for a concert by musicians Regniff and Enoch. Finger and cane backward. Bob never offered Bill a byline. Bill may have asked for one at some point, but he had not pushed. Though Bill's colleagues considered him the best comic book writer of his generation, his identity was still a secret to Batmanians, as fans were called. In 1964, that changed. Comics editor Julius Schwartz started to spill about Bill. He announced that a fellow named Finger had written most of the classic Batman adventures of the past 2 decades. The next summer, New York City hosted the first large-scale comic convention. Bill and 3 others spoke on the first ever panel of comics creators. The panel moderator was a longtime Batman fan named Jerry Bales. He introduced Bill as a creator of many characters and as a Batman writer from the very first. Jerry also did his own detective work about his detective hero. The same summer, at the convention, he interviewed Bill about the beginning of Batman. And for the first time on record, Bill revealed that he had done more on Batman than write stories. Later that year, Jerry put out an article based on the interview. And so fans learned Bill's third secret identity, his role in creating Batman. Bob publicly accused Bill of exaggerating. Despite that, Batmanians believed Bill. They began to murmur that he should be credited as a co-creator of Batman, that this bill was long past due. But Bill still didn't push. He could write great fights, but could not seem to fight for himself. Bill's final Batman comic book story went on sale in late 1965. In the early 1970s, he began writing stories for Mystery Comics. On the morning of Friday, January 18th, 1974, Bill owed DC Comics 2 scripts, but turned in only 1. He assured the editor he'd have the other story on Monday. Come Monday, there was a Bill Finger story, but not the one the editor or anyone else wanted. That Friday afternoon, a month shy of his 60th birthday, Bill had passed away in his sleep. Now grown, Fred brought his father's ashes to a beach. He arranged them on the sand in a fitting shape. The tide crept in and swept them out to sea. Bill died knowing Batman was one of only 2 superheroes to be published monthly without interruption since the 1930s, Superman being the other. He died having seen Story by Bill Finger begin to run on reprints of his early Batman work. But it was mostly after he was gone that fans went to bat for Bill, urging DC to acknowledge him as co-creator. In a publication that came out shortly after Bill's death, the publisher of DC stated that Batman had lost one of his 2 real fathers. In another, DC ran a full-page drawing of Batman bowing his head at a gravestone for Bill and a summary of his career that ended. Few men have contributed as much to comics as Bill Finger. In Bob's later years, he showed a side few, if any, had seen before. Bill never received the fame and recognition he deserved, he said in 1989. If I could go back before he died, I would like to say, I'll put your name on it now. You deserve it. But Bob didn't amend the part of his contract requiring that he always be listed as the sole creator of Batman. Jerry Robinson had long wanted a high-profile way to pay tribute to his old friend. He led the establishment of an award to honor past and present writers who greatly enriched the art of comic book storytelling. The award did not go to Bill. It was named after him. In 2005, the first annual Bill Finger Awards for Excellence in Comic Book Writing were given out. Today, Bill Finger continues to inspire comic creators. Like Bruce Wayne, they vow to fight for justice, their own. They refuse to let what happened to Bill happen to them. From Milton to Bill, from salesman to Batman, from secret co-creator to unsung legend. Bill's most important story was not one he wrote, but the one he lived. Will his name ever be added to every Batman story? Batmanians are keeping their fingers crossed. The end.